誰為愛世人願捨身？這禮物化作活存的心靈。幸福是接受和活出這禮物的真諦，教我學習愛到痛時就如遇見主。人一生最如緊，豔陽縱使多耀眼，如若沒愛，彷彿天空阻隔了光線的障紋。請潔淨我心眼，長留着愛的恩泉，清澈璀璨。
琴日有機會喺聖伯多祿大殿參與彌撒，近距離睇到教宗若望保祿二世嗰件染血嘅內衣，聽過黃修士同韓總主教分享對兩位準聖人嘅感想。羅馬之行第一日已經非常充實。今日係兩位教宗封聖嘅前夕，我決定四周圍行下，認識下嚟自世界各地專程嚟見證封聖嘅朝聖者。羅馬有四大聖殿，除咗喺梵蒂岡城裡面嘅聖伯多祿大殿，拉特朗聖若望大殿亦都可以話係最有代表性嘅一座。
我身後嘅係拉特朗聖若望大殿，呢度係羅馬四座宗座大殿裡面最古老嘅一座。呢度亦都係天主教羅馬教區嘅主教座堂。教宗係羅馬教區嘅主教，所以呢一度亦都係教宗嘅堂區。
天主教會每一個教區都有一座主教座堂，裡面設有主教嘅座位，而拉特朗大殿裡面嘅主教座位就係教宗嘅宗座。教宗嘅宗座亦都象徵佢作為聖伯多祿嘅繼承人嘅訓導權威。當教宗以宗座權威宣佈一項有關信仰或者道德嘅教義嘅時候，佢享有不能錯誤嘅神恩。距離拉特朗大殿冇幾遠，有一啲地下墓穴，嗰度曾經埋葬咗幾十萬基督徒同為主殉道嘅烈士，而駐守喺其中一個地下墓穴嘅係鍾桂新神父。難得嚟到羅馬，我哋走去探鍾神父。出發之前做咗啲功課，知道鍾神父係若望保祿二世嘅超級 fans， 我好想了解一下佢點解咁中意若望保祿二世。
我係1947入慈幼會57升神父，喺大公會之前嘅，但係大公會之後見到教宗若望保祿二世啦，俾我好大嘅點講啊，靈修神學一個培育，一個視覺係唔同嘅。我係親身見過若望保祿二世嘅，就係1980年，我喺梵蒂岡嗰度見到佢同佢握手時候，我見到哎呀！教宗聖父啊，請你為中國祈禱啊！教宗即刻答我冚話，你唔使驚，我每日都為中國祈禱。哇！教宗咁講係咪真㗎？我就好開心啊！我相信教宗唔會講錯，一定為中國祈禱。但而家在封聖嘅前夕啊，教宗喺天上啊，一定為中國祈禱啊！聖年2000年啦，喺10月1號啊，國慶日啊，佢將中國嘅120位嘅真福賜命，提前用教宗嘅特權咧，提前將佢就封聖。哇！嗰時我都有點講，都有參加，覺得哇！教宗點解佢就因為佢覺得好愛中國，而係在國慶嗰日，唔單止話係天主嘅中國嘅教會，全中國人民咧都受教宗嘅祝福。
原來鍾神父親身見過若望保祿二世，教宗又咁熱愛中國，唔怪得知鍾神父對佢咁難忘。
若望保祿二世，我係見佢好匆忙嘅時間，但係嗰陣時咧，即係唔係好深入。我深入到佢嘅思想啊，個內涵啊，就佢文件。
若望保祿二世在任期間發表咗好多文獻，邊一啲對鍾神父影響最深呢？
身體神學，哇！身體啊， 點啊？身體神學啊，身體人嘅身體有天主喺度，嗰度係有神學。哇！乜搞錯？就係身體神學個文件裏邊咧，就講咗話普通嘅教友夫妻嘅關係，夫妻嗰張牀啊，教宗話呢個係祭台嚟㗎。哇！係咪搞錯？嗰張係祭台嚟㗎。一個高點咯喎，仲講話修道人啊，點講神父啊，佢哋嘅身體嘅點樣？亞當厄娃未犯罪以前佢身體點啊？係好光榮嘅，唔怕醜嘅，赤火身體都係天主嘅光榮嘅。原罪之後就唔識睇啊，睇錯睇歪咗啦。但係原罪之後嘅人嘅身體點啊？天上嘅人嘅身體點啊？究竟喺呢個身體上覺得好清楚覺得嘅。
冇諗過身體嘅神學意義係咁革命性嘅，的確係教宗若望保祿二世留俾我哋嘅寶藏。翻去睇翻先。今次因為兩位教宗封聖而嚟到羅馬，除咗見證呢個歷史時刻之外，亦都好想了解多啲乜嘢係成聖。
我未曾成聖，我需要開始悔改，我都會犯罪，我都會要告解。我覺得我都係罪人啊！天主就好似話好多次揸車啊，差唔多就冇啦。揸車嘅冇咗就救我啦。靈魂都係好多次啊！如果唔係天主幫我都搞唔掂啦，唔做神父啦。所以話你話成聖係嘛？我唔識講成聖啊，悔改啊，即係話天主帶你啊，即係打開你嘅心，認罪，我的大罪，咁樣開始啦，開始成聖啊！
離開地下墓穴，我哋去咗聖保祿城外大殿，呢個聖殿亦都係羅馬四大聖殿之一。入到大殿，抬頭一望，發覺四面嘅牆都有歷代教宗嘅畫像。呢啲畫像都係馬賽克鑲嵌畫，手工非常精細。歷代教宗嘅畫像一幅接一幅，組成一條橫帶，象徵住宗徒嘅傳承。佢哋一代傳一代，帶領住教會度過每一個年代。呢一座係紀念聖保祿嘅大殿。睇到攞住劍同聖經嘅聖保祿像同佢嘅石棺，令我諗起佢為咗傳福音不惜多次遠行。佢唔驚沉船，唔驚受審判，唔驚坐監，為嘅只係將耶穌帶俾更加多嘅人。苦難對佢嚟講唔算得係啲乜，到最後更加喺羅馬被斬首處決。我請佢代禱，祈求天主俾我多啲勇氣，好似佢咁樣視傳福音為生命裏面嘅重要使命。喺聖保祿城外大殿撞到5位嚟自加拿大嘅朋友嚟到羅馬見證2位教宗封聖，有卡加利嘅 Father John、Deacon Paul 同佢太太，仲有嚟自溫哥華嘅一對公公婆婆 Kitty 同埋 Henry。第一時間同佢哋傾下偈。
Tomorrow is a special day for me as I celebrate 40 years as my priest ordination, and I thought the canonization of John Paul II and John XXIII were almost the soul of Vatican II, would be a good celebration for me to come and join the world in that celebration.
John Paul XXIII was the Pope of my youth. That was the Pope that was always on the wall in my mom and dad's bedroom, growing up. That was who I, thought of as my Pope, growing up. And then, of course, John Paul II was one of the longest reigning popes.
I think I grew up with both of them, with the ideals that they wanted the church to work with. John Paul II, his deep spirituality influenced a lot, because I remember him coming to Goa, having meeting late night, but early in the morning of the day of the visit, papal mass, at 5 o'clock in the morning, he was doing Station of the Cross by himself. So that's how deeply spiritual he was. Yeah.
我哋就約咗香港3個朋友，一個老人家80幾歲，啱啱領洗，坐輪椅。咁我都老弱殘兵，我都揸拐杖。不過多謝天主啦，都仲有咁嘅勇氣嚟啦。呢個禮物嚟嘅，多謝聖母。 我哋好中意呢個教宗，因為佢在任咁多年，去世界好多地方宣揚和平，同埋仁愛，同埋推動個慈悲耶穌，同埋因為如果唔係我哋就唔知道念慈悲傳經原來咁好。
And then towards the end of his papacy, the illness and the sickness that he endured gave us an example how dignified it can be to suffer.
我覺得佢殘而不廢，我哋第日
腦筋都好清醒啊。
係啊，個腦筋好清醒，但佢盡量都磨練自己咧，好似每一分鐘都要為聖教會做嘢咯。咁就算啊，我哋睇到佢好辛苦個樣啊，甚至流口水咁，但我哋好憐惜佢，但我哋又好欣賞佢。一見到佢咁咧，我哋個心都為佢祈禱。
聽日就係教宗封聖嘅日子，佢哋而家嘅心情係點樣呢？
I feel spiritually motivated. I feel excited that this is happening, and I was able to come and be at their tombs and part of the celebration. Fortunately, I have a ticket to go for the celebration.
There's such a sea of people. So we're going to start trying this afternoon, and so we'll hopefully work our way a little closer. Our rosary group gave us 1,000 rosaries. They make rosaries, send them all over the world. So now we have to also load ourselves down with the roses so we can take them and hand them out for people in prayer.
多謝天主俾一個咁嘅教宗我哋。
Kitty 同埋 Henry 一個75歲，一個已經80歲啦。由溫哥華咁遠嚟到羅馬，令到我好感動。雖然 Kitty 係攞住手杖，不過覺得佢一啲都唔軟弱，反而佢同 Henry 嗰一份堅持令到我好佩服。離開聖保祿城外大殿之後，即刻趕去同另外一班朋友見面。我哋約咗 Mark 同埋 Priscilla， 佢哋帶咗佢哋2個小朋友，仲有3個大朋友 Madeline、Lawrence 同埋 Edward。喺若望保祿2世在任期間，其中一樣最為人所知嘅貢獻就係創立普世青年節。我哋有陣時叫佢世青，自己都去過幾次世青，不過就錯過咗喺多倫多舉辦嗰一次。嗰一次亦都係若望保祿2世主持嘅最後一次世青。Mark 同 Priscilla 親身喺嗰一次世青見過若望保祿2世，對呢位教宗念念不忘。
我諗我哋對 JP2 嘅認識咧，就係喺2002年嘅 World Youth Day 啦，咁就係多倫多嗰次。咁可能嗰次印象真係好深刻，咁令到我哋覺得 JP2 係真係一個其實早就應該做聖人。我諗可能嗰次因為嗰陣時佢嚟多倫多咧，已經係我諗係大約三年後佢就過身啦。咁嗰陣時佢係好老，見佢一個咁即係咁有 youth 嘅 spirit 嘅 Pope， 咁可能我哋嗰陣時，我哋自己都係啱啱出嚟做嘢啦，啱啱讀完大學，咁係好 relate 到 with 呢一個咁 youthful 嘅 Pope， 咁所以今次就覺得呢一個係好難得嘅機會。
知道咗即係個日子定咗啦 for 個 canonization， 咁然之後就唔知點解突然間可能係即係聖神降臨，定係即係有刻其實佢係好似係9月30號 announce 嘅。話將會係4月27號咁樣啦，咁然之後我係10日之後咧就已經 book 咗呢個 trip。咁點解要帶細路嚟咧？就係因為即係我都好想佢哋去 be part of 呢個咁 once in a lifetime 嘅 event 咯。
Mark 同 Priscilla 有一對今年已經6歲嘅龍鳳胎 Owen 同埋 Natalia， 佢哋今次4個人一齊嚟到羅馬。想像帶住2個小朋友去旅行已經好唔容易，仲要喺好短嘅時間裏面決定要一家人嚟見證今次嘅封聖，都係因為喺多倫多嘅世青節被若望保祿2世深深感動，非常之佩服佢哋。
其實我諗好多人都記得㗎，即係World Youth Day 佢個in Toronto 嗰個 Last Mass 咁。佢即係其中一句即係都話我年老啦，即係佢話 Never settle for anything less than the ideal。即係我覺得呢一個 phrase 好 powerful， 即係嗰一刻嘅我，即係10年前嘅我啦。聽到 yes， 即係 yeah I have to reach the ideal 咁樣。 即係而家10年後嘅我，即係做咗個 mother 啦，有自己嘅負擔啦，即係好多 becomes you know 即係 what is the ideal anymore？ 即係好多時好似有時就係咯，即係我都同 Mark 講，即係好似會唔會係好似跟即係 become 一個 mediocre 咁樣嚇，咁就係啊，但係呢一句係成日都好喺我個 heart 嗰度，成日都記住咯，即係去 remind 自己，即係無論如何，我嘅生活係幾簡單，或者係每日都係返工，you know 放工去做呢啲嘢，但係點樣去每一刻都去做，即係 try to live out 呢一個 highest ideal。
每次見翻 John Paul II 個樣咧，你尤其是佢揸住支拐杖，挨個頭去個拐杖嗰刻，就覺得即係佢真係好有 determination。He means what he says。咁同埋佢話 We're all called to be saints。I believe it。I fully believe it。咁即係我覺得佢好有勇氣同年輕人咁樣講。咁我覺得我哋身為基督徒嘅我哋咧，係真係有呢個 calling， 同埋真係要preach this message to everyone。當你問到 JP2 係一咩人，佢唔單止係一個 Catholic 嘅 leader 啦，當然佢其實係一個 world leader 嚟嘅。當我哋同我哋唔同嘅朋友講話我哋今次會嚟 JP2 嘅 canonization 嘅時候咧，佢哋有啲係唔係天主教啦，有啲係甚至唔信教嗰啲咧，都會聽到呢個名咧，就覺得呢一個係一個值得 celebrate 嘅 human， 值得 celebrate 嘅 world leader。咁個個聽到都係會好有興趣，同埋會覺得呢一個係絕對係一個你唔係 Catholic 都會信呢個係一個 saint 嚟。
好似 Mark 同 Priscilla 嘅，亦都有嚟自美國 Seattle 嘅 Lawrence， 對多倫多嗰次世青非常深刻，最感動佢嘅係呢一幕。
You know, you had a really frail old man who could barely move in any other normal circumstances, and he came down the plane when he landed in Toronto, walked the steps by himself, walked himself to the big stage at the CNE. I mean, he really showed us true willpower. Moved by the Holy Spirit, this love for Christ that can make him do anything that he wants to.
每次同新朋友傾偈，就好似收到一份若望保祿二世送嘅禮物咁樣。嚟自美國聖荷西嘅 Edward 就認為若望保祿二世對佢最大嘅啟發係佢面對困難時嘅態度。佢面對困難嗰陣時嘅堅毅，甚至能夠成功扭轉政治局面。
若望保祿二世係第一個唔係意大利籍嘅教宗，咁相當佢一上台嗰陣時，應該都好多風波困難嘅，但係佢有呢個毅力嚟繼續面對佢呢個困難嚟做事，我覺得係一個對我一個好大嘅鼓舞。佢被選做教宗嘅時，個 Iron Curtain 係仲未落嘅，但係佢憑佢嘅力量啦但即係佢叫我哋天主教幫Iron Curtain 嗰邊啲人祈禱，咁喺1989年終於個 Iron Curtain 跌咗，咁就解放咗波蘭同埋其他東歐嘅唔同國家。我覺得呢個係一個好大嘅奇蹟。
Madeleine 同其他朝聖者有啲唔同，佢而家喺羅馬讀緊神學，同 Madeleine 同埋 Lawrence 傾偈，發覺佢哋唔單止透過世青認識若望保祿二世，亦都對佢嘅文獻有一定嘅了解。佢哋都覺得若望保祿二世談論工作對現代人非常有啟發性。
一個波蘭嘅教宗喺一個咁樣嘅社會，喺一個本來係共產社會即係出嚟呢個咁樣嘅教會出嚟嘅一個教宗，好關懷或者佢係好關注人，其實係應該係自由嘅。人嘅工作咧，唔係淨係為咗賺錢，為咗當然啦，人係為咗生存啦、賺錢啦。所以我就好深印象其中一個就係佢嘅工作通諭。工作通諭佢係人即係人工作係可能係為咗賺錢養活自己啦，但係人先至係工作嘅主體。工作係為人，唔係人為工作。
What I really like about the encyclicals is that they're not all completely directly Bible related in the sense that only Christians can read them or only Catholics can read them and take something away. They really address the whole world. And so when you read in Sanctissimus Annus that, you know, if you're a manager at a company, you need to treat people with full dignity and you have to recognize Christ within them. You don't even have to frame it that way, but that's how you become a much better boss and that's how you can run a much better company.
我哋往往就係為咗工作而生活咯，就唔係為咗生活而工作。 其實呢一樣嘢係好落地嘅。不過我哋覺得呢個係一個教宗嘅訓導，有幾時輪到我去明白啊？咁所以我覺得係我哋常常都會去將教宗或者教會嘅訓導咧，將佢擺到好高，覺得係我哋係理解唔到嘅，或者覺得係呢啲應該係神父先至去閱讀嘅嘢嘅。但係我諗其實教宗去寫每一個道理咧，佢哋都係有一個對於人嗰個理解，同埋對於人嘅困難係有一個嘅感受。
另外一位被封聖嘅教宗若望23世在任嘅時候 ，Madeleine 同埋 Lawrence 都未出世。不過佢哋知道呢一位教宗對教會同埋社會都有好大嘅貢獻。
若望23咁當然啦，我冇親自見過佢啦，冇觸摸過佢。不過因為我自己嘅研究或者係我自己嘅學習裏邊咧，我都會好大量去睇佢嘅教會訓導。為我嗰個感受好深㗎。其實睇若望23和平於世通諭，教宗若望23嘅和平於世，佢真係傳揚緊和平呢個信息。因為喺嗰個時代咧係啱啱冷戰嘅時候，和平我哋講得好順口啊，和平。但係佢真係將一個好核心嘅元素啊，人係有尊嚴㗎，人唔係工具嚟㗎。人嗰個價值係嚟自天主嘅肖像。即係呢一個嘅呢個感受係好深嘅。
He set the whole thing in motion. So he started this whole Vatican II. He started the council, what we know the Catholic Church to be now, which was very different from what it was in the 50s and 60s and even hundreds of years ago. So this missionary character of the church, this church that interacts and infuses regular civil life, it all started with John the 23rd. I'm really excited to be here in Rome, where I think Benedict's going to be attending the canonization as well. So really we'll have 4 popes, all connected to Vatican II in some way, present at St. Peter's tomorrow.
2年前啦，真福雷永明神父宣福嗰個典禮，我喺度諗，點解我要去參加？慢慢我自己有個感受就係、現代嘅聖人咧，為我嘅重要就係、佢同我同一個年代，佢同我喺一個時代一齊生活過。咁咧我去到雷永明神父嗰個家鄉啦，見到佢嘅親人啦，我覺得有一個感覺就係、我真係觸摸到佢。所以譬如話若望保祿2世我去參加過2屆嘅普世青年人，我係見過佢啦，聽過佢嘅聲音啦。或者係我睇過佢嘅寫作啦。我哋呢一代，我哋有呢一代當代嘅聖人，譬如話若望保祿2世啦，佢將會被冊封為聖人。若望23啦，或者一啲嘅真福品，譬如話係德蘭修女啦、雷永明神父等等，佢哋都係一代傳一代。去重溫或者係將基督復活一啲嘅信息，好活生生咁俾我哋，所以我覺得呢一個封聖或者聖人嘅意義，為我係喺呢度啦。
聽 Madeleine 嘅分享，令我更加明白點解天主教會要冊封聖人。識咗好多新朋友，睇錶已經差唔多7點鐘。而家聖伯多祿廣場附近已經有好多人聚集，大家都要快啲喺街度揾個靚位，準備聽日入廣場參加朝頭早10點鐘舉行嘅封聖彌撒。
而家係4月26號嘅黃昏時間，太陽都開始落緊山啦。咁我而家咧就喺梵蒂岡，同埋好多人，我哋喺呢一度咧有一個小小嘅自己嘅屋企，就有2隻嘅。咁其實個感覺咧就好似翻喺上年喺里約熱內盧嘅普世青年節咁樣，好多年青人，亦都有好多唔係年青人嘅人都喺晒度啦。總之係非常之多人，亦都有好多嘅警車。咁我哋都而家未知道我哋聽日廣場會幾時係開門俾我哋入去嘅，我哋人人都等緊聽日4點鐘，咁就我哋睇下會發生咩事啊！
冇諗過有咁多人專程嚟參加教宗封聖嘅彌撒，呢一晚要點過呢？我哋又可唔可以入得到聖伯多祿廣場呢？千祈唔好錯過下一集《愛常傳》。
喺兩位教宗若望23世同埋若望保祿2世封聖嘅前夕，通往聖伯多祿廣場嘅大街上面，逼滿咗數十萬希望親身見證教宗封聖嘅朝聖者。呢啲唔同國籍、唔同年齡嘅人，毫無怨言咁樣等足一晚。
我非常願意親臨現場，哪怕住一晚上，在大街露宿街頭一晚上，或者10晚上，我都心甘情願。
愛常傳，帶大家體驗教宗封聖萬人空巷嘅盛況。
睇完呢一集《愛常傳》，如果你想分享你嘅感受或者故事，歡迎你打我哋嘅熱線電話同我哋傾下。我哋下個星期同樣時間再見，天主保佑。